Ladies and gentlemen, as avid viewers of the channel will know, small things often come in great packages, which is why in today's video, we're going to be building the Dream ITX gaming PC. Now this one is sponsored by MSI in partnership with Nvidia, which is why we have a whole host of super powerful components onside, or offside I guess if you play football, on our desk that we're going to put together and create something truly awesome. So throughout this video, we're going to walk you through all the components that we have on our desk, and then at the end of it, we're going to show you exactly what this thing looks like, and then of course show you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you can see exactly how this thing performs. And ITX rigs do always take a little bit more planning than your standard bigger ATX because everything has to be compatible, and I think we've managed to do it today. But spoiler alert, this graphics card, the length of this is 1mm shorter than the maximum that in theory you can put inside here. So hopefully this will work without issue, but if it goes wrong, I don't really have any alternatives. Let's crack on. So yes, let us start this off by looking at our core components, because as I say, I want this to be a really powerful rig, but I don't want this to compromise when it comes to space. I want something that you can put on your desk and take up a small amount of room, but not have to go for like really low-end components or ones that are kind of just like leaving performance on the table. Hopefully everything here should literally work straight out of the box. So we have our 5070 Ti. This is an Nvidia GPU. Obviously it supports the latest features, things like DLSS 4 technology, including DLSS transformer, which I love. Obviously great ray tracing performance, and DLSS frame gen. But the reason we're going with a 5070 Ti and not something like a 5080 or 5090 is pretty much just down to the power that this card is going to use. It's actually pretty efficient. So as I say, you've got to remember in a case that's actually this small, which is the Deepcool CH170 digital, the more wattage that we consume, the more wattage that we have to get rid of somehow. And I don't want to go overboard to the point where we're having to like tune components down when obviously you're paying more money for them in the first place. So that's the graphics card that we're going for. As you'd probably expect in a video like this, we're going for the world's fastest gaming CPU, the 9800X3D. I mean, technically there might be some games that will be outperformed by the 9950X3D, but that is, well, it just has an extra 8 cores. It's going to use a load more power, but we're not really going to use that for gaming. So again, doesn't really make sense here. And obviously it's a whole bunch cheaper as well. We're going to pair it with 32 gigabytes of RAM, CL30, 6000 megahertz, 2 terabyte SSD. And then this isn't always the most interesting thing, but definitely in an ITX rig, you have to be very careful with the cooler that you're going to use. We do have another one on standby. They're both from Noctua actually. This one is the NHL12S. And the whole idea with this essentially is it needs to have great cooling performance, but be pretty low profile. We can't fit like a 360 radiator and a massive graphics card inside here. As I say, we've got to be very, very careful. But in order to get this started, I think actually we'd usually go with the motherboard, but I do want to have a little walk around of the case that we're going for. And spoiler alert, if you are in the States, unfortunately, this is going to be quite hard to get hold of, but obviously there are loads of alternatives. In Europe, though, not the case. So as I say, this is from Deepcool. This is the CH170 digital. There's a couple of different versions of this, but I think you'll agree, this kind of looks like an NZXT H1, but obviously it doesn't come with like a cooler or anything, power supply. You've got to add everything yourself, but it's just a cube, really. So as long as you can fit everything inside here, you've got mesh pretty much on all sides. So as long as you are careful with your component choice and they fit in, you should have a lot of fun, and hopefully it's going to be reasonably easy to build in. But ITX rigs aren't always so. I mean, we should probably start with how we actually get in this thing. The NZXT one literally just like pulls off. I'm going to guess that it starts with these screws to take the base off. There is a manual in this little bag, look. Okay, so this plate literally removes like that, and then does that reveal some more screw holes. So this panel now actually removes, look, and this allows us to get inside this part of the chamber, but obviously there are a couple more screws to remove the rest of the panel. So it's not completely toolless, but if that means that it is more stable and, to be honest, cheap to produce, because this is not an expensive case whatsoever, but actually quality-wise feels pretty good. Definitely feels a whole lot better than a lot of Deepcool cases. I've got to say, it's probably worth it. Ah, interesting. It doesn't actually look like you can take the top off because we've got some rivets here. So they're kind of guiding you as to how to actually build that. So it looks like the top and this piece here does not remove, but they have got this extra panel here. And then the whole thing, look, will remove. You've actually got a dust filter on this one as well, and then leave you with that bare bones frame that I'm hoping is going to be pretty easy to build in. You can see you've got a couple of bars here, so if you want to add extra fans and things. But again, please remember that the maximum allowable for your components, it's going to change depending on what you're putting inside here. So you can't like max everything out. There will be compromises. As I say, power supply, if you go for a full size one, it'll limit your graphics card, but also coolers and things. There's only so much room inside here, so obviously you can only have so much girth inside here. Great word, isn't it?
Girth.
So now that we have this stripped down, it should, he says as he drops loads of screws on the floor, it should be ready for our motherboard. And the one that we're going for here is from MSI. This is the B850i Edge. Obviously, you can buy higher-end X870 motherboards, but for gaming, almost everyone really will want to go for B series just to maximize the bang for the buck, really. Let's take this out of our bag properly, shall we, and have a look. It's borderline between white and silver. I'd actually say that this is more silvery than white, which probably is going to be better for us in this black case, but obviously if you went for a white one, this looks like it would work just as well. You do have another M.2 slot on the back as well, and then we do have one on the front, and you can see we've got this little heatsink fan, which obviously I'm never really a massive fan of, but if you want to go for PCI Generation 5, especially in something like this, then having cooling is certainly no bad option. As I say, especially if you're going to go for Gen 5 SSDs that will get very, very hot. It's also worth bearing in mind, by the way, that you do get this little splitter cable inside the box, because on the motherboard you'll see that you've got loads of different headers and things, but because physical space is limited, you'll find on boards they often like to split them up. So here, I'm not sure if that's USB, we'll find out in a little bit, but we also have a fan header and an addressable RGB that all kind of like splits off the motherboard like that. And then obviously you have your Wi-Fi adapter. But nice thing on this board, if you're going to use wired, it goes up to 5 gig, which is going to be great if you're upgrading to internet where it's above gigabit speed. But let's get our motherboard ready to receive by plopping it down on top of our box. Then we can grab our 8-core Ryzen 7800 X3D. In the UK, actually, you can get 7800 X3Ds fairly cheap. And by that, it's still not exactly cheap, but I mean, for what it is, around about like £330 or so. So about £100 less than this. And the performance difference is not exactly crazy. So I'd argue the smart money for most people would probably be to grab a 7800 X3D, but I do understand if you want the absolute best. Obviously, open this up to expose the socket, drop this down nice and gently before placing it back in and getting this secure. Saving this for later on. The absolute best joke you've ever heard in the last 30 seconds. Obviously, one of the main downsides of going for ITX is that you do start to lose out on a couple of features here and there. And the main one for a lot of people is that you have 2 RAM slots rather than 4, so make sure you get all the capacity you need straight out the gate, essentially. The one we're going for here is going to be perfect for gaming though, 32 gigabytes, 6000 megahertz, and this is a little bit cheaper because it doesn't have RGB on it, which actually, I'd rather not have RGB in an ITX rig like this because often it kind of shines through and just looks a bit weird. So let's grab our CL30 kit and get this out of the box. You can see nice and low profile, which is another thing that may well help us a little bit later when we actually mount that CPU cooler. And then doesn't matter which slots this time because you're using both, just make sure you get them the right way round and drop them into place until they click at the top and the bottom. Grab yourself a smaller size screwdriver and then remove the heatsink for our SSD, making sure that you peel the protection from the pad away. As for the actual SSD that we're going to be using here, this one is from Samsung. This is the 990 EVO, not the Pro, so you don't get the same performance. Technically, this is PCI Generation 5, but it's still going to cap out around the same speeds of a Gen 4 drive, but this is often on offer, and compared to when it first came out and it was overpriced, the value on this is usually pretty good, especially if you want to specifically go for Samsung. But as I always say, make sure you're getting a, not necessarily a value SSD, but one that is on offer, because quite usually that's the best way to go. Just drop this down into position, and then grab the heatsink and just lower that back on top, being careful with that cable actually not to unplug it, or you're gonna have to plug it back in. But once you've got that heatsink back on, you should then be ready to move on to the cooler. And this is kind of like those one of 3 components really that might fit, and you've got to hope that you've done your research properly. So as I say, this one is from Noctua. I think I've used this once before, and don't go thinking this is going to be like the world's best cooler in terms of performance. Obviously, if you went for like an all-in-one or like a massive tower cooler, that would be better, especially if you're using a higher TDP chip, but we are limited by space. So we pretty much want to go for the best small cooler we can get. Now, as you will see, this is not exactly tiny, but compared, as I say, to like a big normal cooler, comparatively, yes, this is pretty small. You can see actually based on the fan how small this is. So hopefully this is just going to sit on top like that without any clearance issues. Oh, I think, yes, just about, look. I mean, to be honest with you at this stage, you can't really see. If it is going to work, it is literally by the skin of our teeth, but I'm not actually convinced that that is going to sit, because to me that looks like it's catching on the RAM. Obviously we can move this fan on the other side, which is what we might have to do, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. No, hang on a second. I think I've under or maybe overestimated this case, because if you actually look at where the motherboard is going to go, it's here. So surely we've got all of this room here available for cooling, right? I would have thought actually that you could probably fit something quite substantial in this. Your main limiting factor is obviously going to be here, I think, with the power supply. So for that reason, I'm thinking that we can actually upgrade this to something far bigger rather than go down the really small route. I mean, obviously this is what you would have to use in a smaller chassis, but I'm willing to take the risk and say we can actually go for something a fair bit bigger. So I'm going to upgrade this to the PureRock 2 FX from Be Quiet. It does have RGB, but you don't need to plug it in. And obviously this is quite a lot bigger and taller, look, but I should say as well, I was having problems. I don't think I actually was going to get the clearance with this underneath it, but I didn't get as far as, I say ruling it out. It looked like we had clearance problems. So I think if we put this inside like that, we are firmly at test fit stage at the moment, I'll have you know. I'm going to take these mounting bars off, and then that should allow us, he says, dropping everything everywhere, to get this down and into position, look, over those screw holes. And then we can almost do ourselves a little bit of a clearance test, because yeah, look at that, look. That's loads of room. How about that? There was no need. I was overcompensating by going for something low profile. And as I say, that is in no way going to be like a bad cooler at all. But obviously you are limited in terms of the size of the fan and the heatsink, whereas we can fit a whole lot more in there. So yeah, I'm going to go with a Be Quiet. But let's take the opportunity to remove the default AM5 mounting hardware, plop our plastic spacers over the top, then grab the AMD bar and screw that on top of those posts. Then you add your thermal compound in the middle. Then you can pick up this central bar. This is a little bit fiddly, but compared to a lot of air coolers, it's a breeze, to be honest. You just drop that over the top. Oh, and then you can remember that the fan should be off. Oh, what have I done? I was going to say it was going so well, but we had the wrong cooler in the first place, so maybe I should have used a radiator, because I never have issues with those. Right, that looks better. Get that secure, place the fan back. No issues with clearance there. And it definitely is worth noting that if we do have problems with actually cooling that CPU, you do get a couple of those extra hangers inside the box. So an extra fan on the back of there would obviously help quite a lot, or you can add it on the back of the case, or potentially both. It looks like our CPU fan plugs in over here, look, and then there is actually an addressable RGB in addition to the one that's on the splitter right down here at the bottom of the board. As I say, not everyone's going to want to plug this in because it would look more stealthy, but I like a little bit of RGB just to know it's on. Alrighty then, I've got to say at this stage, I'm pretty pleased actually with how it's turning out. It just looks like a small scaled down rig. As I say, you've got a fair amount of space here for cooling, so if you wanted to go for something bigger, considering like it doesn't clash with anything, you do have a little bit more space. The bit that I'm wondering now though is how the graphics card is going to work, because we've got all of these cables trailing here that obviously are going to get in the way, but because this bar is here, I think we're going to want to take this off and put the graphics card in. But then as soon as we put the graphics card in, it's going to be harder to actually plug in our bottom I/O. So I think the way I'm going to get around this is to take this I/O bar off now. Does this just lift off? Yes, it does. And then I'm going to work out exactly what needs to be plugged in down the bottom and just plug that in now and then put the graphics card in, bar on top. I think that'll work. So we've got our USB Type-C. Oh, front panel, where's that? That must be down here somewhere, which is exactly why I'm doing this now. Our chunky USB 3 look is down here at the bottom. And then last but certainly not least, we have our HD audio for our 3.5mm jack. And this one should plug in just here. Would help if I could get this the right way round. There it is. So yep, our front I/O is all connected now, and I think that was the right way of doing it. But let's drop our motherboard box neatly on the floor for Editor Cole to clean up at a later date, and then we can press on to the graphics card.
That was a joke, by the way. I clean up my own stuff.
We have the Ventus 3X RTX 5070 Ti, and as I say, normally I'd be very excited about this, and I am, but I'm also very, very nervous because I really want this to fit in. This one is not actually going to be gigantic and huge. You can buy bigger MSI graphics cards that obviously will not fit inside this, but this is kind of at the limit really of mass of graphics card, strength of graphics card, while still fitting in a chassis like this. But obviously there are other options available as well, but do check the specifications to make sure it will physically fit before you put it inside there. But yes, you can see this actually goes quite nicely with our board. It's got like a silver design and accent to it, but wish us luck. We're going to do ourselves a little test fit. Oh, that looks okay. Yeah, that should be fine. Fair amount of room. I thought that was going to be more dramatic than it is, but that's a good thing because I don't know what I would have said to MSI because that's the only 5070 MSI sent out. But it's certainly not over till it's over. So let's remove those slot covers, grab our GPU, and then do this for real now. Line this up with our slot, give it a good push home, and then yeah, look at that. That is like it was designed for this, and I planned this, which I genuinely did, but as I say, 1mm of clearance apparently, but I think you've got ever so slightly more than that. And it's nice that you do actually have a little bit more room underneath that as well, so it's not touching the mesh, which should aid in airflow. I mean, let's not jump the gun though. Let's make sure this definitely goes back into position. It's quite a lot of cable actually, arguably too much. We might have to cable tie this down, but yes, that did click in nicely. The exact power supply that we're going to be using in this is from Corsair. It is the SF850L. This in theory should be ideal for this because it's also ATX 3.0 rated, so it will come with a cable for the 12-volt high power connection on this graphics card. But as you can see, it is a fair bit smaller than a standard ATX. You can actually buy smaller ones than this, but this is not like the tiniest ITX case in the world, so it's not required, and being bigger usually means it's a little bit more efficient because you can actually fit a bigger fan on that, but it's pretty impressive in power supplies actually. You're getting smaller and smaller ones that go higher and higher in terms of wattage. Obviously this one is modular, but this should just sit here like this, and then you can see you don't actually have that much clearance for all of these connections, which is why you wouldn't be able to fit like a full-size ATX in this without kind of turning it over and like having a load more cables and a shorter GPU. I am going to get the cables plugged into this before we proceed though, because I think it is going to be quite tight down there. And it's also worth noting that one of the advantages with going for a smaller SFX power supply, it's only advantage obviously if you're going for a small rig, but it's that the cables are conveniently smaller sized as well, as obviously they just wouldn't fit into such a small chassis. But let's get these connected. So once again, let's now place this in for real, and I'm being very careful to kind of tuck these cables so it will fit. This is going to be held in by 3 screws. Then remember that you actually wanted it the other way around, so do it again. And then it should literally just be a case of grabbing these cables now and plugging them into their respective places. So we've got our 8-pin CPU like over there. It's not going to look as neat as a normal rig, but to be fair, there's a fair amount of space here. He says blocking our ATX, but that should be okay, look. And then I think, ladies and gentlemen, it's just one more cable to go, this being our PCI Generation 5 connection, ATX3. It's worth noting that this one is a 300-watt cable, which I think should be fine with a 5070 Ti, but above that, no. And if there is going to be, I don't know, like a super version in the future that uses more power, then obviously you wouldn't be able to do a straight upgrade here. But this should just drop in like so. And then, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to add an extra fan to this, but you don't necessarily have to. Otherwise, that is your rig complete. Really not too much to it. Obviously, you are relying on the fact that the graphics card is going to breathe through here, so that's why you're not going to have loads of fans and things. But because you have the pass-through design and air is going to come here and then be blown into the CPU cooler, I think it would be a good idea to mount an extra fan up here at the front. And I believe the way to do this is just to take this kind of multi-bracket off. I'm going to pick up a matching Be Quiet fan, and then in theory, this just screws on. Certainly looks like it. So we'll get that screwed into place, and then just these couple of cables to plug in. Tie up our loose ends, drop our power extension into place, and then this will just route through this little hole at the back. And I'm not sure about this, Editor Carl could correct me, but I have a feeling they might actually sell a version of this case that then pretty much would be done like this, that you could have in like a normal configuration, you have it on your desk. Again, really nice small cube, but obviously this is designed to sit like this and to sit back on that base. And you have a USB here that's going to go in the back of your motherboard, and then you get like a digital readout, so you don't have to rely on software to know whether this thing is kind of cooking itself. Hopefully not, and obviously you'd know because your fans were ramping up, but especially in ITX with smaller components and things like that, temps can get high, so I think it's a nice little touch really that you can see your temps at all times. Let's plop this upside down. Grab your cable and then feed it through on the base, and it's nice that you can actually turn this 180 degrees if you want the LED readout. On the other side, it doesn't really matter about the internals because you're not going to see those because obviously it's a mesh side panel, and then it really should just be a case of screwing those 4 remaining screws. But is it going to work? Of course, we will need to grab ourselves a gaming monitor. This is from MSI, 240Hz, QD OLED, ridiculous for PC gaming. But of course, we're also going to need to grab ourselves a mouse mat, and you guessed it, the one we have is the very own PC Centric mouse mat. The clearance sale, get it before it's gone, is linked down below. And as we've discussed before, I apologize, the shipping is not as cheap as I would want, but it gets on a plane, I think, to get to you. Sorry. Of course, though, it is definitely worth noting that one of the downsides of going for an ITX rig like this is that you will need to actually turn it upside down whenever you want to plug something in that isn't on the front panel. Now, there are ways around this. As I said, you could just get your own feet and then have it like in a more normal configuration. But if you want it like this ultimately just is the compromise that you're going to have to go for. But enough talk, or at least the time for talk is over. Where's the power button? Let's do this. I didn't turn the switch on the back, probably, did I? Oh, yes, that's better. That's much better. And do you see what I mean? I like a little bit of RGB, just so you know it's on, but nothing more than that. I mean, it says no signal at the moment, which is never fantastic. Oh, well, it's thinking about it. It's thinking about it! I got nervous. Woo! ITX. Honestly, boom. Really pleased with this. As I say, so easy to build in, loads of space, lots of volume of air as well, which is hopefully going to help with the thermals, and we didn't have to muck around with anything small. You could absolutely go for a larger cooler in here. I don't think you're going to have too much issues at all. I already have a copy of Windows on this, but obviously if you want to install this yourself, you can follow our guide in the top right corner of your screen. That will show you how to get everything sorted and set up, really. But let's plop this back on for realsies, nestle this into place, and then hopefully when we push that power button, we now have our completed rig. And I actually quite like that little like circular ring of RGB in the middle, but again, it's not going to be to everyone's taste. But yes, I forgot to press delete, but otherwise obviously just go into the BIOS, enable XMP, set a custom fan profile so everything runs nice and quietly. At the moment, it's basically silent with these Be Quiet fans. But let's stress test this by doing some gaming. And so then, ladies and gentlemen, as if by magic, here we are. A day has passed. I have got all of the games downloaded. We are set up and ready to go. But before we get there, I do just want to say that we obviously can see this properly now that we've got the software installed, and I really love the look of this. I mean, okay, as I say, I'm not really a massive fan of that RGB, but I would just turn that off because obviously you've got the readout at the bottom, so you know that this PC is on. You don't need anything internally, but obviously you can do with it as you please, really. It really is just like a more evolved NZXT H1, I think, that you can customize yourself. The software is actually quite lightweight. You download it, don't need a restart, nothing. Literally popped up, and you can choose between having your CPU, GPU, and if you have a certain one, I think, your PSU. Not sure why you'd want your stats for that, but it'll show you temps, usage, frequencies, things like that. The only thing that I will say is that at the moment, it doesn't look as if you can actually cycle between GPU and CPU. You have to go into the software and actually manually change it, which is a bit of a wasted opportunity, because in an ideal world I'd want it to cycle through. Maybe there is a way, and Deepcool can let us know, or if you've got this case you can let us know. But yeah, that's a little bit annoying. But enough of that, let's jump into the bit that matters, the games. And this is a brand new one for me. This is Doom: The Dark Ages, and we currently got this set to 4K. DLSS is set to performance, but remember this is the new transformer model. So on a 4K panel, especially 27-inch, genuinely this is the way I would choose to play. But obviously if you want to turn this up, you can. We got this set to Ultra, but we can go above that to Nightmare and then Ultra Nightmare, which we'll do in just a second. And as you can see, we're getting around about 90 FPS. So you may recall that the earlier Dooms, they seem to be pretty easy to run. I'm not sure that this is the case anymore. Obviously you can turn the settings down. There's a lot more that you can do. I mean, if we go into the settings, I can actually show you. Here's our graphics options, and you can see everything that we have. But when we go down, I've just used the Ultra preset, but obviously you can change everything really to your heart's content. Only thing I will say is that this is a game that has ray tracing on by default. I don't think there's actually a way to disable this. You can turn on path tracing, which we'll do in just a second, which is even higher quality. But yes, this actually is an absolutely ridiculous, stunning looking game. I've got to say, I've only just started this, as you can tell, but really impressed actually with the way that it looks. I mean, you can definitely tell, especially on an OLED monitor like this, the amount of contrast. I haven't even tried this in HDR yet. As I say, it's just an absolutely fantastic looking game. But yes, around about 80 FPS or so. It's probably in that kind of sweet spot really, because obviously it is an FPS, so you do want to have as much responsiveness as possible with something like this. But obviously because it is so visual, you want to hit that sweet spot. If it was multiplayer, I'd say you definitely want over 100 FPS, but this doesn't seem to be a bad way to play. But as I say, this is also a game that does have path tracing. So if we turn this on, we'll leave it at its default. This is definitely going to lower the frame rate down quite substantially, because obviously path tracing is the most advanced form of ray tracing, and it's essentially kind of just making the scene as realistic as possible, but that does come at the cost of performance. So bear in mind we are running this at 4K with DLSS at performance. Yeah, you can see that this is not really going to be an ideal way to play. I mean, interestingly, our PC latency is under 55 milliseconds, so it kind of meets my target for latency. But yeah, in terms of smoothness, you can absolutely tell that this is running at 43 FPS. So I think the way to actually solve this would be if you're playing on a 1440p display. And then when we come out of it, what is our frame rate going to be? Okay, around about 75, 80 FPS, so slightly lower than we had without path tracing at 4K. But if you're playing on a 1440p display, then obviously this gives you that option. But don't forget, this being an NVIDIA graphics card, obviously we can also turn on our frame generation, or our NVIDIA frame generation. My cheat sheet, of course, if you're new to the channel, is that I would say you want to keep your PC latency below 55 milliseconds for the absolute best experience. But having turning this on, you can see actually that the frame rate's around about 120 FPS now, which is really nice. But that PC latency is way below that 55 millisecond mark, around about 33 to 35 milliseconds or so. So this, we need a parry. There we go, boom. But as I was saying, these settings actually seem to work really quite well if you're on a 1440p display. I mean, the only thing is that obviously I've turned the DLSS down to performance, whereas at this res, usually I'll want this at balanced or above. But because we do have this new AI model, the transformer model, the quality is actually quite a lot better than the old CNN, the convolutional neural network that you had before. So it's just a case of obviously working out what kind of works best for you, really, especially like this where it is quite fast paced. It's kind of nice to have the option to choose between the two, but that's a shame. This is probably the sweet spot now, right? Around about 120 to 100 FPS, about 42 milliseconds of latency. And obviously this being a 50 series GPU, we can go back into the settings. And if you want, you can find DLSS frame gen, and then you can set this to either 3x or 4x. And again, your cheat sheet is as long as your latency is below that 55 millisecond mark, and crucially, the frame rate is below the frame rate of your monitor, then you can turn this on and enjoy. I would never recommend having like 300 FPS if you've got 120 Hertz monitor, because then you're being shown AI generated frames rather than rendered frames. So frame generation, if you didn't know, by the way, it essentially just adds AI generated frame in between rendered frames, and the new multi-frame generation technique just adds more AI frames in between the rendered frames. So at the moment, what we're seeing here on 3x is we have rendered frame, AI rendered, but we can go all the way up to 4x and then hit apply. That will boost the visual smoothness of the game even more, and as you can see, we're now getting around about 170 to 180 FPS on screen, and our latency is about 45 milliseconds. But this is not kind of like true FPS in the sense that it doesn't lower your latency, but it's definitely worth experimenting with, really. I mean, personally speaking, in a game like this, I'd probably have it on 2 or 3, as you can start to notice a little bit as you turn up the AI frames, but that is the point. You've got all of these settings, that's the beauty of PC gaming, and obviously you can find what works for you. Oh, but ladies and gentlemen, let's now press on to title number 2, and as you can see, I've finally learned how to actually play Indiana Jones, and I've managed to beat everyone up in the arena because I'm so great at gaming. But this is a game, as you can tell, I'm playing through at the moment, really enjoying it actually. I heard it was quite short, but if you do all of the side missions and things, it seems to actually be lasting a fair amount of time, which is good. And this is another title that uses Vulkan, and for whatever reason, they seem to be very well optimized. I'm sure a lot of this is down to the developers as well, but this is another one that does actually have ray tracing baked straight in as well. And it's a really good looking game. We've got this set to Ultra, but you can go all the way up to Supreme if you want to go, well, for even higher quality settings. But this is also running at 4K with DLSS set to performance with that new transformer model, so it looks incredible. And as you can see, we're getting around about 130 FPS. And because this is actually a much slower paced game, you'd almost want it to trade places with Doom, actually. I'd probably aim to run this at about 80, 90 FPS or so to get a good balance between the way it feels and obviously the way that it looks. But yeah, it's just really impressive, actually. And again, another one that has ray tracing by default, but you can go into the settings and you can turn on path tracing. So we don't actually have frame generation turned on at all at the moment, which obviously you can do. I mean, we can do that now, actually. We'll set this to 2x because you shouldn't need any more than that, and then our frame rate should go up to around about 180, 170 FPS, but our PC latency is still really nice and low at around about 28 milliseconds. So yep, again, great way to play. But I want to find our magic path trace setting. We'll set this to medium. We'll come out of that, and then obviously the frame rate there has decreased quite a lot actually, around about 80 FPS or so. But once again, this is another title, as I say, this is probably the target really for me in terms of visual quality, but you can see the game definitely does get a whole lot better. But let's see what happens if we turn our resolution now down to 1440p, and again, as you'd expect, much higher frame rate, exact same settings here, and we're now getting PC latency of about 36 milliseconds, but now 170 FPS. So yeah, that obviously feels quite a lot smoother and more responsive as well. In terms of temperatures and things, you could definitely get away with a better CPU cooler in here. This was not the most expensive one anyway, to be fair, in the world. I think this is around about 35 to 40 pounds, but you could put like a 240 rad in here or something much bigger. Deepcool actually had this pictured with an Assassin 4, which is massive. But yeah, I've got to say, noise levels, not too bad either for what it is. It's going to make a fair bit more noise than a normal computer, because obviously it's open, but compared to a gaming laptop, it's much, much better because it's like a lower pitch. So not too bad in a completely silent room. If you had speakers on, I think you'd be fine, let alone headphones. So yeah, got to say, all round, pretty impressive. Now, ladies and gentlemen, comes the point where we could pretend that this wasn't the second time that we filmed our bit on Warzone, but the game decided to record in HDR, even though HDR wasn't enabled, which ruined the footage, as editor Carl can show you. Great.
I turned HDR off. I can't tell you how much I can't stand getting Warzone to work properly. It's the most stupid game.
So instead, we're going to do it again and pretend that that never happened. And obviously, I think for most people, multiplayer is what you're going to be playing most of the time on your PC, right? So you want a system that is going to be able to play the games that you want to play and play them at a high enough frame rate that you're not going to be losing out and ultimately can be a better player. So what we have here is Call of Duty Warzone. This is running at 4K. We have DLSS set to performance and we're using the ultra setting preset, but obviously you can go up to extreme if you want to do that. And actually I'm pretty happy with the frame rate, getting around about 140 to 150 FPS or so. Obviously you are going to get a fair bit of variance depending on where you are, but gotta say I'm quite impressed actually. I mean, obviously if you wanted to turn the DLSS up you can, but in a game like this there's just not really any point. I mean, if you have a 4K screen, then it's always worth kind of experimenting with really, because as soon as you turn the actual native resolution down to 1440p, even with high quality DLSS, it usually looks worse than just turning the DLSS down. But as I say, it is going to depend on the game and obviously the settings and things that you want to use. But yeah, around about 150 FPS, I think that's going to give you a great experience really, especially on this 240 Hertz display. I mean, let's put that to the test, shall we? We'll turn this down to 1440p.
Someone will get us in the back while we're doing so.
But fortunately for us, I was fantastic in the gulag, so we can jump back into the game, and you can see that our frame rate has actually increased quite substantially actually to around about 208 FPS. It doesn't look quite as good, but if you did have a 27-inch 1440p display, I think you'd be very, very happy with the visuals here, and obviously with the frame rate as well, because 200 FPS, you're not really going to have many excuses for not being good at the game now, are you? I will draw your attention to the top right corner of your screen one last time though, just in terms of CPU bottlenecking, 99% on the GPU, so even at 1440p, the CPU is not holding our system back, which is great. But I will say that the temperatures are a little bit on the high side for me, around about 87 degrees. So what I would change with this would probably just be have a slightly bigger cooler, and then where possible, actually have it so that the airflow is going from the bottom of the system up and out the top, whereas at the moment we're going down, which doesn't really make any sense, but I kind of got confused when I was building this because obviously the orientation is kind of all over the place. Really, really happy with this. I think the case for around about £55 in the UK is pretty ridiculous. If you like the look of it, it was really easy to build in. It obviously can fit a lot of hardware, and I like the LED display down the bottom. Really, really impressive. In terms of everything else, obviously you're not really holding back any of your components as long as obviously you do cool them sufficiently. That will be the thing to pay very close attention to. But there are going to be smaller cases that will come with more compromises. But if you want to go for something that is relatively small, can fit in your desk, and obviously looks like a cube, now I think this is very easy to recommend. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you make of our system? What would you change? What would you tweak? And actually, if you had RGB inside this, would you keep it on or turn it off? As I say, for me, I'd turn it off, but obviously it's always nice to have the option. Thank you guys so much for watching this video though. We really appreciate it. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this, get yourself subscribed, and don't forget that current pricing on everything featured in this video is located down below with our affiliate links. But thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.